that we're having. Here, I'll move it. You good? Hello?
Good evening. Good evening. Oh, thank you. I didn't know if this was going to be interactive, and I hate the kind of speakers that force you to say it twice, so I won't ask you to do that. But I do hope you're having a great evening, and I want to go ahead and thank you so much for joining us here at Castleton United Methodist. I do want to address the elephant in the room, and that's not a political statement. We are paying attention to the weather. We'll be watching that, and we'll be sure to communicate if anything changes and happens. But I am grateful that you were able to join us despite of cloudy skies for what is the first of a series of 4 really important conversations involving housing. And as we'll hear from our esteemed panel this evening, not just the issues that housing has, and it's so dependent on so many other things. It's not just an isolated variable, right? But very impactful in a number of ways. But not just the issues, we're also going to hear about potential solutions, about the process, about how people are currently handling housing crisis within our education system. And what I hope, and I'd like to task each one of you with as you leave, is to paraphrase leadership in our church. We're not just here to listen and learn, which is a good first step, but we're also here to find a way that we can make a difference, that we can advocate for change, that we can correct perhaps ill-intentioned, but misinformation, right? That there's something that each one of us has a role we can play, and I think a responsibility, quite frankly, as community members to be involved in this way. So just to begin in terms of framing the conversation here, I want to give you a couple statistics that I think stood out to me as we were talking about the issues involving housing and education. According to the eviction lab at Princeton University, every year in the United States, 1.5 million children, as people under the age of 18, are evicted. In Indianapolis, our eviction rate is twice the national average at 16%, which is quite frankly shocking and horrific. So we know, of course, it's a national issue, but it is empirically, objectively worse here in our city. And 1 in 5 Hoosier children lived in a family with high housing burden, which means that the household themselves spends over 30% of their income on housing alone. And if you have stepped in a grocery store in the last 2 years, you know that groceries have gone up, gas is always expensive, right? Costs are never going down. So if you're talking about a family with this high housing burden, we recognize that housing insecurity is not just homelessness, right? Sometimes it's making the rent barely every single month until one time you just can't make it. So I think these numbers are important, but what they lack is the narrative and the experience behind them. I know when I read Matthew Desmond's Evicted, and I assigned it to my classes, the students were shocked to hear about the challenges with eviction in our country. And I was shocked that they were shocked because we'd been talking about the data all semester. But if you have the opportunity to read Evicted, one of the things I think it does very well, that you'll have the opportunity here tonight, is that it provided the personal experiences, the narratives, the names, right, the experiences and perspectives of people who weren't just the number of 1 in 5 children, but the actual life and perspective that they lived. And I think something like that is invaluable, which is why I'm so glad we're all here this evening. Now, I want to let you know that if you submitted questions, I hope we did you a fair honor. We've included those this evening, and into addition, other questions that we prepared. But if you didn't have the opportunity to send them online, I mentioned this is the first of 4 panels that we'll have, and our next one is going to be coming up on June 4th, also a Tuesday, also 6:30, and you can go to castletonumc.org and submit your questions for that. It'll be on housing and violence. So please share your questions with us. For those who did submit, thank you, and I hope we'll address them very well tonight. Now, that said, I want to introduce myself, and then I'll ask our panelists, rather, to introduce themselves, and we'll get right into the topics of discussion. My name is Merrified Wilson. I have the honor of serving as your moderator this evening, and professionally I serve as an associate professor of political science at the University of Indianapolis. I also serve as a media analyst throughout the state in TV, radio, and newspaper. I'm also a proud member of this congregation, and as I mentioned, your moderator. So what I'm going to ask our panelists to do, first and foremost, this is a test. Making sure that your mic is switched on, and that's kind of tricky, I know. If we'll just go around, if you can introduce yourself, share your name, your title, and your relationship in terms of the housing and education crisis.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Shawn Bush, and I'm the Director of Student Services for Lawrence Township Schools. And my connection to this work and this cause is that as the director of a division that is here to serve students, it's not just the students, it's students and their families. And that is with any need that they could have that is outside of academics. And so oftentimes that is basic needs, which includes housing. And we have a lot of families who are struggling to maintain secure housing. So it impacts us greatly as a school district. And so as the director of a team who is present to help eliminate whatever barriers exist, this impacts us greatly.
Hi, my name is Tracy Beer. I am the McKinney-Vento liaison for Lawrence Township Schools. So my job is to work solely with all of the homeless students and families in the entire district.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Johnson, and I am the court navigator at Lawrence Township Small Claims Court. So I am the first person, other than the judge, that the eviction tenant normally sees to try to help find resources, housing, you name it. it's right here, or I will find it for you. I'm that person, the resource liaison.
Hello, my name is Patrick Chavis IV. I'm a local attorney. Brief background, I formerly was the Deputy Director and General Counsel for the Indianapolis Housing Agency. I helped the city write their vacant and abandoned housing plan, and I've been in the housing industry most of my career. I currently serve in Lawrence Township with Cheryl. I am the grant administrator for the Eviction Diversion Initiative, which branched out from a pilot project that we were awarded from the State Supreme Court in preparation for lifting of the moratoriums. When evictions would start again, we were one of 10 grantees in the nation of the EDI grant from the National Center for State Court. So my role includes program management. I'm also the court day facilitator, which is a mediator. So I sit down with landlords and tenants to try to make arrangements for tenants to stay in. If vacating is unavoidable, make arrangements for a smooth transition, try to avoid evictions on people's records and the like.
Good evening. My name is Betty Robinson, and I work with the Lawrence Township Trustee's Office. I'm the Director of Administration. We work with families to try to keep them housed when there has been an emergency, and we try to keep the family on track. Thank you.
Did we deliver or what? We have a great panel here. Do you have any initial question or applause? I wanted to mention before we start with the questions that I'd like to invite you to make an offering in the back at the end of our discussion, that this would support the Lawrence Schools Emergency Fund to help these families in facing these crises and emergencies. And also that you are all invited and welcome to join us volunteering beginning on Tuesday, June 4th for Gleaners. And you can register for this if you go to castletonumc.org/Gleaners. So let's jump into it. This is a very big question, but I think it is an important first question. Many of us have probably not had a firsthand experience, perhaps, with eviction or a housing crisis, but you've worked in this area, you've seen this. Can you tell us what happens when someone's facing a housing issue? Maybe they recently lost their job, they're no longer able to make rent, maybe they've been evicted. I know these are different circumstances, but could you share stories from your own experiences in terms of how this has happened in our community and what that experience looks like?
I can share my experiences with this scenario. When families come to us and they cannot pay their rent, several things are played out with them or has played out with them. They probably have lost the income. Maybe the income hasn't changed, but the rent in our area has gone up so high they can't afford to pay the rent. So now there's a difference that needs to be paid. Question is asked, how will you pay it going forward? They don't know. So we talk with the landlord. Sometimes there are workouts, sometimes there aren't workouts. If the applicant or the resident owes 3 or 4 months of rent, and sometimes they wait that long, I don't understand it, but the rent can be around $4,000 by the time they come to us. The trustee's office cannot pay $4,000 in rent. So now they would need to go to the court and talk with the navigator and see if there are any other resources they can tap into to try to get the rest of the rent paid.
Which is almost impossible because it's that amount. Just like Ms. Betty said, it is extremely hard when they come at the very last minute. I just recently, about a month and a half ago, just partnered with about 15 property managers and individual landlords to be a part of an advisory board committee so we can get together and try to figure out and stop this crisis, because they know before we know at the court, of course, because they come and they file the eviction. I'm trying to get the list before it's sent to the court for the eviction. Some property managers say it's illegal. It probably is. But then you have some that say, I'm gonna give it to you anyway. I'm trying to be that friend where they're giving it to me anyway. And then when they do, then I can reach out and set up something. Mr. Chavis, he put together a form, a legal documentation, which is allowing the tenant to pay before it goes through eviction. Because once it goes through eviction, a lot of people don't know this, but as soon as it's filed, that landlord or property manager cannot, when I say cannot, they cannot take a dime because it's going through the process. But the property manager do not share this. The tenant comes to me, they won't take my rent, I have it, and da-da-da. And they blowing smoke. And it's one small bit of communication. If the communication is there, it doesn't have to blow up so high. But they cannot. And if they do take it, if the property management company do take that dime, the whole process has to start all over, which already is at the second or third month. They usually will probably put the file out of 2 months, the second month of it. It depends on the property. But they don't understand that. The tenant doesn't understand that. So that's one of the reasons. But it's a process. It's a process. You can't just get them out. The tenant can't just leave if the property manager try to scare you. You have to get out. You do, but not when they say, because it's a process. And I think it's need to be communicated what the process is.
Just real quick, let me clear up something for Cheryl. Having the list is not illegal, so don't worry about that. It's not. It's a corporate policy. So if they want to pre-provide their list, it's more a corporate issue whether they're allowed to do it or not, but nobody can be held responsible for that, so you're not going to go to jail. Okay? All right.
I don't care.
I just wanted to make sure of that. Just real quick, I mean, there's a lot of stories that I could tell. I'm sure others have specifics. I can say a few reasons why people are getting behind other than loss of job. It's medical issues, unexpected. Your car goes down. We're dealing with a group of individuals now that have other collections, whether it be the medical bills, credit cards, things like that. They give judgments, and all of a sudden their wages are being garnished at 25% of their net. Well, it's kind of hard to pay your rent when your wages just got garnished. So despite that, they might be able to manage it. And so, for example, one of the projects we're working on is helping tenants understand how to get those garnishments lowered, and the process you have to go through to do that. And most judges, and we do it from a housing twist, most judges will consider that if it's going to adversely affect your housing, because that domino effect is pretty serious. Most of the collection efforts have been going on for decades, so they're not as critical as your current housing. So that's a big part of the issue. And back to the topic at hand, think about what happens to a child's education when they're going through this process, how it's going to be disrupted. Even though McKinney-Vento helps with transportation, you have to find a place to live first. So these are some of the issues that we're dealing with.
I think that's my biggest issue with the families that I'm working with also is I get a lot of calls where they raised our rent, we can't afford it anymore, I've got to move in with my mom or whoever. So I've been hearing that a lot lately, and you're right, the rent that's being increased that's my house payment, and I just built a new house. It's unbelievable. So I think that's the biggest frustration for a lot of my families. They're doing what they need to do. They have a job, they have a car, they are getting their kids to school, and then the rug's pulled out from under them, and they are lost. They don't know what to do next.
Speaking of being that friend, Ms. Johnson, that is absolutely a part of the role of my team, is to establish those relationships with our families, because by the time we find out about it, so often it's too late to do anything. And people don't want you in their business. They're embarrassed. They don't want to tell you that they're behind on their rent. So if I have a team that families see are trusted partners, and this person helped me with this, maybe they can help with that. We are trying to build those bridges with the families so that I can't tell you how many times in a month I say, if we don't know about it, we can't help. And, you know, it's kind of, we're kind of in a situation as a public school entity because we're K-12 education. You know, we're not a housing agency. We're not. And, you know, I always say we have to keep the main thing the main thing. However, we also have to find ways to support our families. And so even though we can't be the ones to provide rental assistance, we can't be the ones, you know, we're not a housing agency. But we do have partners. We do have donors that will say, we want this money earmarked for this. These are the ways that we would like to help families. And that's the only way we make it happen. So thank you, by the way, for those of you that have donated.
That's terrific. I mentioned earlier that we asked the community to submit some of their questions, and it's actually a perfect segue because several people asked what tools are available for homelessness families with school-aged children. And then there were a couple specific follow-up questions, in particular about maybe those families that may not understand English. And you mentioned relationship building, which I think is essential in so many things in life, but how do teachers identify? How do they recognize, or administrators or social workers, how do you see a child and know that this is happening? And then how do you start that process for this child is, their family is being evicted? What's the next step? How do we do that?
So there's a lot of times where I'll have families reach out to me directly, but a lot of times I will have a teacher reach out to me directly, or the liaison at the school reach out directly and say, hey, I think this family's going through this, or, you know, whatever. So I'll reach out to the families directly and let them know, like, hey, this is what this program is, this is what we can do, tell me about your situation. From there, sometimes they're pretty open and honest, other times not so much. Other times they're like, stay out of my business, I can handle this. So, but I feel like as our school district, we have a really good bucket of tools, so to speak, that we can reach out to with our youth, especially our high schoolers. We work with Outreach Inc., who works specifically with high school students that are homeless and on their own. We work with Bright Lane, which used to be School on Wheels, to help with tutoring and that type of thing. So it's just a community effort. Not one person can solve this whole problem. So it takes a village, as Sean likes to say.
And when it comes to families that don't speak English, you know, we think about the challenges and the difficulties that English-speaking families are having navigate these situations. I cannot even imagine what that must be like if you don't even speak the language. So we do have, for one thing, we have our largest subgroup in Lawrence Township is Hispanic. And so while we have, I think, like 46 different languages that are spoken in Lawrence Township schools, but Spanish is by far the biggest. And so we do have quite a few staff members that are Spanish speaking. I have, on my team, I have 2 district bilingual family liaisons. They're both Spanish speaking. But we are doing everything that we can to, a few months ago, we didn't have any Haitian Creole speakers in Lawrence Township, but now we do. Now we have 3. So we're trying to have our working population mirror the population of the families that we serve. We're doing the best we can. And in terms of learning about what those family situations are, in all honesty, a lot of the families that are immigrating here, they're living with each other. So most of them are qualifying for McKinney-Vento services. So, and we know that need is very great.
For the trustee's office, for the immigrants or the non-speaking Americans, we can accept, the state says that we have to have a state ID and we have to have a social security number. There are other documents that we can receive, such as an I-10 number. We can receive a passport, U.S. passport. But then there are those immigrants that do not have ID at all. And that becomes a concern, knowing that they really need resources. But then the state agency, the trustee's office is a state agency. We are not able to serve at that point if they don't have those required documents. The Haitians don't have the required documents, and they can't get the required documents. So we run into that at our office, because that's a population that we can't serve.
Just briefly at a higher level, what is important, McKinney-Vento can't do it all. There's not enough resources, financial or human. It is important that there's a collaboration between the courts, the schools, and the advocacy organizations, those that are out there to help, so they can coordinate and holistically help families. What Miss Betty, we used to work together at the housing agency, she didn't mention it, but the wraparound services that you need to help families in all the areas, because once again, McKinney-Vento can only do so much. They can't provide rental assistance, but these families still need rental assistance. So when we identify them, we have to have a way to kind of triage and say what other services are going to be out there, who are our partners we collaborate with, who are partners we need to collaborate with, so we can help these families more holistic.
And actually, that's where, again, I come in. We just recently hired 12 navigators that's doing the same, just like my colleagues spoke of. And so I have 12 other humans, which I love, that's doing what I do. And it's greater and more powerful for me. We just connected again with the Urban League. Have another appointment coming soon with the whole group of navigators. It was some other resources that I didn't even know about that a couple of them found. It was Casey's cause. That was very instrumental here recently. And they were giving out thousands. Usually it's maybe about 300, 200, 500 here and there. But when you find help, it's like it's a godsend for me, because it was just myself doing this wonderful cause. But it's just myself. So now my other colleagues are finding money that I didn't hear about. And I'm like, oh, what? Well, yes. And it's so exciting for me. I did not bring my business card. I wish that I did. I forgot. We were off today because of the election, so I've been a mommy all day. So I do apologize. I do not have my card. But to get a hold of me, my door is constantly open, constantly, because of resources. I have people calling me from other townships. If I can help, I can help, and I'll do the best that I can do. So just know that, please, if I don't say it again.
So can I interrupt just for a minute? So just to back up a little bit, we keep talking about McKinney-Vento, but I don't know if anyone really knows what McKinney-Vento is, so I probably should explain that a little bit. So Crystal, please correct me if I'm wrong on all this. So McKinney-Vento is a federally funded program to help families who are in transition. So that could be anywhere from having a house fire. We had that big fire over here last night where it affected 3 of our families. So it could be domestic violence, it could be evictions, it could be living conditions. So one of the main things that we look at as McKinney-Vento liaisons is if it's fixed, regular, and adequate. So are they living somewhere where it's considered as being a fixed place, a regular place that they can go to, and adequate. If there's mold growing or the health department has come in and said, no, this isn't safe, you need to leave, then that would qualify them. And the other important thing about McKinney-Vento and working with outside agencies is our definition as McKinney-Vento, and so we classify families as being doubled up or in a hotel or a shelter or in a car or whatever, where HUD does not recognize being doubled up. So if we want to use some of the agencies and they go by the HUD definition, then a lot of our families won't be able to take part in that because probably, I'd probably say 75 to 85% of my families are doubled up, if not more. So, so that also kind of puts a barrier to where we can send them based on how they're living.
And what's wild about that to me is that's basically the difference of a definition.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it lends nicely to this next question in terms of barriers. And from each of your perspectives, whether it's in the court system or in education, like what are some of those primary barriers, whether they're definitional or stigma-based or cultural or language we mentioned earlier? What are some of those barriers that you've seen? And then as a follow-up, maybe, how do you address those?
So that's all the above that you just said. So all of those are barriers on some level or another. I think my biggest barrier is funding and transportation, because that's our goal for McKinney-Vento. It has other benefits, but the main benefit is getting the kids back to school and keeping them stable. And that's probably my biggest barrier, is trying to figure that out, and what is considered reasonable versus like helping a senior versus helping a kindergartner being on the bus for so long or whatever. So, but just, I think Pat said just making sure we're collaborating with everyone, because Cheryl knows all kinds of resources that I may not know about, and having her by my side now has been phenomenal to navigate that system. And I know nothing about the court system.
We
so
became besties.
we did.
Let's hold hands.
We did. So, so that's probably my biggest barrier. Sorry, I went on a tangent.
And I would agree that was the number one thing that I would have said is integration of resources, because we got a whole lot of this person or group is doing this and this person or group is doing that and this person over here is doing that, but they don't necessarily know what each other are doing. And, you know, if we are communicating and come together, and I'm so proud to have everybody on this stage that we do work together. And we're always looking for ways to strengthen that connection. So definitely, I think integration of resources is a barrier that we want to continue to break down. And then the other thing, as a school district, not that we have a lot of control over it, but we talked about it in so many ways with your intro even, housing is too expensive. You know, it is so expensive for our families, even our families that have good jobs. It's hard to make ends meet. Rent is astronomical, and it's heartbreaking that our city, we're in the situation in the place that we live, where our eviction rates are among the worst. So, what we can do as a school district is come alongside families best we can and try to help with those things that we can impact. But I think the cost of housing is definitely a barrier.
And I'll piggyback on that. Housing costs, without going through all these theories and whatnot, it's basically a supply-demand issue. And Indianapolis was targeted within the past few years by corporate entities, and they bought up everything. Apartment complexes turned over. If you guys remember, it was hard to even buy a house. You were bidding over list price to buy a house. That drove people into the high-end rental market, which drove people into the mid-level rental market. So it was a domino effect. The prices started going up. So there was not a lot of demand, not enough supply. There's no more public housing being built, very little affordable housing being built. So you either have to address it through increasing housing to make it affordable, or increasing income. Both are difficult processes. There's answers to those, but that's the challenge of the housing, and so landlords are getting what they want. So you raise your rent. If they don't like it, you have a list of people ready to come in and pay it. Well, what's your incentive for not raising the rent? So it's not a matter of the business interests don't really look at the effect of our community and what eventually would lead people to housing insecurity and homelessness, which will become all of our problems. So it's coming down the pipe. It's really an affordability issue driven by economics, and we have to do something about the supply of affordable housing to address.
I would like to step back one regarding the barriers. Excuse me. What the trustee's office is seeing now, in addition to the transportation and the housing cost, is childcare. And what we're hearing is they're giving up the jobs because they can't afford the rent, hoping to get resources to pay the rent. Now they can't afford the child care because there's a cost for that. So that's a barrier that our applicants are now having that we are seeing.
Let me throw in one more. From a court perspective, the amount of time you have when the eviction is filed before you have to be out, it's really quick. And even though a lot of the courts now are allowing people to try to pay and stay, if you can come up with this rent, you may have 3 weeks tops to come up with $5,000, $6,000. So there's not a lot of time built in for you to try to coddle together resources, whether it be a little trustee, a little what Cheryl does, your own income. I've seen families that couldn't get to their 401k in time. There was money in there, but the process took too long. And so we don't have a process where there's initial hearings and then you have another time period to try to pay up. Even though to allow people time to pay, landlords from a business perspective will make a lot more money a lot quicker if you give a little bit of time for the resources to work. So it's almost working against their interest. They want to get you out, but what's the other factor? Somebody's ready to come right back in. So I was talking about the cases where they're collecting over the years. They might get 10 cents on the dollar where they could get it all up front. So we have to deal with establishing why there's a business rationale to give people an opportunity and time to try to catch up their rent, have payment plans, and do things like that.
This question probably makes the most sense for the folks in education, but we received a question from the community involving disciplinary policies, and I think it was specifically targeting absenteeism. We know our state legislature has been very involved and concerned about chronic absenteeism, which is missing over 80%, missing over 20%, not being present for 80% of the school year. That'd be very chronic if you're missing 80%. That's not a good thing either. But with regards to the homelessness populations for those students, is the school system, is leadership aware of the issue? Do they make changes in attendance policies? Do they have grace in disciplinary issues that might be related? Are you familiar with how they might handle that?
So our policies are the same for all of our students. We don't want to lower a bar because of somebody's condition or situation. I think that with absenteeism, that we really try not to make that a disciplinary issue. That's not a disciplinary issue, that's a support issue. And so what we attempt to do is to try to figure out what is the root cause of that student's absence, and is there something that we can do as a school to help support?
And a lot of times, when we address the attendance issues is when we find out they're homeless. And so then we can put in the transportation or whatever other supports that we need to help get them to school. Because like we were saying before, our families don't want to show their business. Like, they don't want to come to school and say, you're a school district, you're not going to help me with being homeless or to save my house, because that's not what you do. So they don't even think about telling us what the issues are. I'm behind 3 months on rent or whatever. So a lot of times with the absenteeism, that's how we find out that things are happening, so,
And sometimes they're not telling us because they're afraid we're going to call DCS.
yes.
If they've had any involvement prior, then they're afraid to let the school know that, because anybody's a mandated reporter, but there's that fear as well, that if I tell them this, are they gonna call on me?
One of the other questions we got from the community was related specifically to McKinney-Vento. And they asked, is it true that McKinney-Vento allows students to finish the school year at their same school no matter where they're living? And as a follow-up, they also asked how many students are involved in this each year.
Involved in McKinney-Vento, I'm assuming?
I would assume that too. Let's
Okay.
go with that, yes.
Okay, so this year is probably one of my highest years. This will be my 9th year, give or take a year. And so this year is my highest year, and I'm about 650 kids that are homeless in our district. Identified, yes. I'm sure there's many more that are not identified. And so that has been quite a challenge in itself. As far as what your question was, that really depends. So when families come to me and let's say they were in Washington Township and they came to live with a grandparent in our district, they really have two options. They can stay in Washington Township and finish the year out, which we like to do to keep that continuity, or they can come and enroll in our district. And a lot of factors really go into that. Obviously the grade, if it's a junior or a senior, they're probably most likely going to stay at the school that they're at. If there's any bullying or anything going on in school, or they need a fresh start, then maybe they do want to come and switch to a different school district. So, but ultimately, it's the parents' choice on whether they want to enroll in a new district or stay in their old district. And that happens periodically. Actually, I was just working with Warren Township because I had a kindergartner who went back there, and the mom was like, I never wanted to leave, but they said I had to leave. So I worked with Warren Township, McKinney-Vento, to try and get them back into school there, which was successful. So.
And that's great to hear a success story too.
Yes, absolutely.
For my panelists involved in the court and the township, we did get a question from a community member that described their own experiences with housing, saying the income wasn't actually the problem, but they faced discrimination because of a criminal past. And we talked earlier about eviction, and I was hoping you could describe, like, how much does this follow a person, right, if you've had this experience before? So not necessarily for our school-age students, but for their parents, for their guardians, what that process looks like, how that stays with them, how you handle discrimination based on criminal past, things like that.
At the trustee's office, the guidelines, the state guidelines, are not very restrictive when it comes to criminal past. So we help. But what we have run into is that they cannot either find a job or maintain the housing. So we have other resources. One is called Step Up. And Step Up does not require any documents at all from a felon. Just pay it. PACE would get them a job, get them housing, move them on. They can do it a lot faster than we can. Even if we pay the 1 month's rent, we still make that referral so they can make that connection.
What you're dealing with, you have to find second chance programs like Ms. Betty was talking about. It is a business decision of private landlords, both individual homeowners and corporate landlords, that have a big applicant pool, and so they decide how they're going to reject people. And there's no standard that says you cannot reject. You can't set a standard for criminality. There's nothing that says that. That's not a protected group, so it's not discrimination in the traditional form of age, race, and the like. So absent there not being enough second chance programs, my encouragement always is try to seek expungements. And the prosecutor does programs, other entities do programs. We do eviction ceilings. We have programs that help with that. Expungements are similar in concept. And then once they're not accessible through criminal histories, that will help. But other than that, it will follow you. So those are basically your options, unless you find a way that you can buy your own home or things like that. So that's always going to be a challenge.
But I do have a listing of resources for felonies and type of convictions. It might not be from Beverly Hills, unfortunately. It's a bad situation where they're still paying the price of having this felony, because the housing for a felon is on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say 4 or 5. So why they have to live so bad? And that's where I come in.
Well, that's another good point, because sometimes your need of housing is going to affect your choice of housing. So sometimes you have to go into substandard housing, and you're held hostage to housing because you don't have any other opportunities. So things like past evictions, criminal history, could put you in a situation where you're housed, but there are health violations and things like that. So that's another subset that people deal with that can't meet that high-end criteria to find housing.
I have that listing. It's not here, but I do share that in my office if ever anyone want a copy, or maybe I can email it or scan it to you. So.
Could you talk in your own respective roles about the impact that policy makes in the process that you have? I know we talked about definitional differences with McKinney-Vento, for example, and how recognizing certain circumstances and not recognizing another can make a really big difference in terms of what folks have access to. We had a question about the impact that policymakers have. Do they recognize these issues as being problems? Are they addressing them in terms of state legislation or perhaps city, county council ordinances? From the roles that you have, where do you see policy maybe helping, and where is policy less effective, perhaps even harmful?
All right, I'll do it.
That's a him.
There are a lot of levels of policy. We can start with federal level if you're dealing with, public housing, Section 8, things like that, all the way down to the court level. Indiana has traditionally and reputationally not been very tenant-friendly in their policies and procedures. Perfect example is, when the city of Indianapolis tried to pass a renter's bill of rights, it got squashed by the state legislature. So there are a lot of competing interests that kind of battle each other in the process. One of the reasons why it's important to expand the narrative into things like McKinney-Vento, effect on children, effect on health, because when you just think about housing and people that can't afford housing, it's not always a popular process or popular programs. From a judicial level, I can give you an example of what Lawrence Township did. Our Judge Bacon, made a decision that when you come before her, she's going to give an opportunity to cure the breach. What that means is you're behind. If you pay it up by a certain amount of time, that case is going to get dismissed. That policy shifted behavior in the township. So once you know that's the case, they became more open to rental assistance. Any rents was in process during that period of time. All of a sudden, big checks are coming in. Now it's a pretty robust process where we can get agreements from landlords and things like that. Not every township has that, but it was a policy shift of one judge, and there are other judges that are starting to do it now. And for that reason, honestly, a lot of cases started going down to Superior Court because in small claims court, not only do you have judges that are more open to the equitable part of being a judge. They're courts of law and equity, and sometimes we forget the equity part. And so there are equitable arguments that could be made on behalf of tenants, and it changes the leverage. So policies from the ground up and the top down are important. Some are easier than others, but the more the message gets out there, who's being affected, I think the better we'll be at changing some of those policy dynamics.
And as for a school, we really try to, if we know a family is being evicted, we really try to encourage them to go to court, because a lot of times families are like, oh, I have eviction court, I'm not even gonna show up, it doesn't matter, the judge isn't gonna listen to me, or whatever. And Judge Bacon has set her reputation so high, and so we really try to encourage our families, like, yes, go to court, tell her your story, because she will work with you. Like, you may still have to leave, but at least she'll give you time, or at least she'll try to work with you, especially if she knows there's kids that are involved in the district. So that's been a huge asset for us.
We're also, Patrick and I, the Eviction Diversion Initiative Program, we are the first to have this. Thanks to my friend here. He's the grant writer. He's brilliant, guys. I'm gonna give him all his kudos. But it's because Patrick, he just wrote a grant, and we were approved with $3.4 million to house what he and I are doing here at Lawrence at the other small claims court. So when I said that I had to hire and train 12 other navigators, this is why. Because it is working here in Lawrence. Yeah. Woo. He hired me about a year ago, and I promised him that I was going to tell the story. No.
It's a group effort.
It's a group effort, so.
It's really heartwarming to hear that some judges recognize, as you mentioned, the equity in addition to the justice. And then it also feels like the flip side of that, I don't live in this township, and I think, well, I don't know if that happens where I live, and that your future might be the result of which area, which circumstance, which judge you're presented in front of, and the decisions that they choose to make and the values that they hold most close, which is a little bit tricky. I will say it feels like a good time to remind folks, since we're talking about policy, that our August panel will be focused exclusively on homelessness and poverty. And you can go ahead and mark your calendars, get out your phones, and that one's gonna be on Tuesday. That's August 6th at 6:30 p.m. And I really appreciate how many people actually followed my instruction and did that. You would be great college students. Nobody ever listens to me when I tell them that. It goes in one ear, out the other. So we talked about barriers. I want to say, aside from funding, this is one of the last questions I have because I think it's the most important, but I was hoping you could tell us what changes you would suggest. Doesn't have to be policy, right? But through the community, through schools, through government or policy or something else, from your perspective, from the role and the work that you do, that would help mitigate this challenge. So we don't have this same panel 1 year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. We laugh and look back and say, it was a problem in Indianapolis. We've addressed that and moved on.
I would like to address what we are seeing in the trustee's office, that's the child care. Once upon a time, there used to be child care offered based on, it was a sliding scale based on income. Not everyone can offer that, and I understand that. CCDF does a wonderful job, but everyone cannot receive CCDF. The waiting list is way too long. You have to go through the TANF program to get to CCDF. But what if you're not on TANF, you're not receiving TANF? What does that family do? Once upon a time in our community, there used to be sliding scales, and churches offer that. Well, they no longer are doing that. So the cost is extremely high for those families. And I would like to see some funding given to some churches in order to help them with the child care cost.
So like I mentioned before, transportation is my biggest issue, and it sounds pretty basic, like, oh, you just send a bus and get them, for where they're going. But I have several families that are like in Beech Grove, and I cannot get a bus to them unless the kids want to get on the bus at 4 a.m. in the morning and then be on a bus for 4 hours, which is completely unreasonable. So I am not the only district. Every single district in this city has the same transportation issues. Our kids bounce back and forth between every single township around here. And so I would love to see something come through for transportation to either kind of help alleviate that, because transportation is expensive. I don't know if you know how much we spend, but it's a lot. So, and yes, we have rideshare programs, but those run about $2,000 a week to get one kid to school. That is not reasonable for a school district. And our McKinney-Vento funds that we get through the federal government have lowered even more each year. So if we want to bring in like outside agencies like Outreach or Bright Lane or any of those, we have to pay them as well. So it's kind of like the story of hearing, is a parent gonna pay for medicine or pay for food? So we're kind of in that same, like, picking the best of the worst, I guess. So, so I would love to see something that would incorporate trying to get transportation, a better way to transport our kids so they are not on the bus for 3 hours before they even start school. And then we expect them to sit there and learn throughout the day, and then, yeah, so.
And I know you said outside of funding, but really it all goes back to that, because transportation, transportation, you know, the cost for transportation, fair and equitable housing. I mean, the cost for that. So it's kind of hard to talk about what we would change for me without that coming into it, because it's such a huge piece of it.
So my dream is this, that whenever the private market comes to government seeking funding, that in return there's a mandate to address affordable housing. So if you need infrastructure dollars for your housing project, there must be affordability elements built into it. If there's a legacy project, Super Bowl, things like that, create some housing from it, because these are resources, they're not extra tax dollars. We're not dipping into another well. Just requires something back for the investment that we're making as a city to improve our city. Even the high-end development, you can create housing from those. So if we would partner, and they would partner also with nonprofit organizations, which will help finance these projects, then we can do a lot more to building more housing, bringing housing costs down at a reasonable cost to our city.
This feels like a great time to remind you also that if you feel so inclined, you can contribute in the back in the offering plates. You can write a check to the church. All of the proceeds go to the Lawrence Township Emergency Fund for the schools. And this is so important because I excluded funding because in a way sometimes it feels like, oh, if we just had more money. You know, like people think of happiness and money. I would have no sadness or hardship in my life if I just had more money. But I think in this perspective, it does. It would address every single issue. And oftentimes you are in an admirable task and position of finding other ways to address the issues because you are left without enough money, which makes it very difficult. As we near our end of our time this evening, I mentioned at the beginning that I hope you leave with one tangible outcome, one task, one personal mission, a way that you can individually impact this challenge in our community. And I'm gonna ask each one of our panelists to identify something that they would recommend to community members. From your perspective, your role experience, could be personal too, quite frankly, doesn't have to be with your involvement in this. But for folks out here who are listening, for people that are watching online, and they're like, this is a problem. They've heard the stories, they've heard the data and the statistics. What's something your average old lady here can do to get involved? Maybe limited on time and money, but has a heart for the issues and wants to make a difference.
This might seem, I don't know how this will seem, but I would like for everybody to just realize that this could be any of us. This could be anybody in this room that is one paycheck away from not being able to pay their rent. It is a myth that this is only happening to families who are experiencing generational poverty or families who have messed up somewhere along the way. It's not that. This could happen to anybody. So I would say, I would just like for people to know and understand that all of these stories, these numbers that we're talking about, all of these families have faces and hearts, and these are great people who are just experiencing a really hard time. So just for people to understand that, and to know that there are lots of agencies and organizations that are helping families, that we do desire and work to integrate the services that we provide, but each of us also has some limitations. I wish we could pay rent as a public school district, but we can't. So we have to find other ways to help our families when they get in that situation, because a kid that doesn't have a stable place to sleep at night is not going to come to school the next day ready to learn. That's just not how it works. And so, again, I want to thank all of our community partners. I want to thank Castleton United Methodist. I want to thank Common Ground Northeast. I want to thank that we have so many faith-based partners that come alongside us and make donations that allow us as a school district, because we don't have a fund for that. So because of the donations we get from the community, whether it's private donors or faith-based organizations, that's the only way we have to help a family that's in an emergency like that. And that's what I have to say.
So I think my biggest thing is the stigma that our families go through. When I first heard about McKinney-Vento, I was in undergrad, actually, and an amazing social worker who is not here, told me about McKinney-Vento and homeless, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, are they sleeping on the corner? Are they in their car? And when she went through and explained everything to me, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, that's what's going on? So, like Sean said, they're just people trying to get along, and you could be one fire away, one car accident away. It doesn't even have to be an eviction that's pending, but that could be the start of this roller coaster. And we have so many families that don't wake up and say, I want to be homeless. They're trying their best to do what they can do, and it's very frustrating and defeating for our families when they get doors shut in their face. And so just not being judgmental to other people, even if you don't know if they're homeless or what they're going through, because you have no idea what people are going through unless you ask.
For me, being over resources, the biggest for me is if you know of any community advocate, anyone that has additional resources, where it's funding, shared housing. Guys, you have no idea that would walk into my office, and I probably cried, he had, at the beginning, I'm like, I'm not built for this, but I am. I'm built for it now. It's like I said, it'll be a year for me on the 16th, but if you come in my office, you will be taken care of. I can guarantee this. probably 85 to 90%, because I can't let it go. So you want a me to be there for you to do this. So that would be my take, is to, for anybody to know of any resources, because this is Indianapolis. It's so many. I just may not know. But if you know, you can call me.
So my thought would be, I think we have three levels of interest. So we have people that are interested in what's going on, determine how they can help. Then you become advocates. What we need is champions. We need to step above the advocates. So what I mean by that is, look at your spheres of influence, broadly. Who do you know? How do you know them? And learn what their passions are and educate yourself on what meets that passion. So, for example, if you watch TV and seeing the dogs on there looking pitiful, if that does something for you, talk about what happens to animals. If it's veterans, and veterans are having issues, and you talk to them about being veterans and what happens to homeless veterans and things like that. We have to go beyond the broad respect that rent's too high, evictions are too high. Everybody knows that now. What do we do about it? We have to take that next step up to talk to people's passions. And if we can talk to their passions, we will get movement. We can create a momentum. Even if we're coming from different directions, the wave will go the same. We can hit this problem from all kinds of angles. There's not one or two approaches. So what can you do in your sphere of influence to move it forward? And if we do that, we'll definitely make a difference.
I support everything that has been said. We do need additional resources. We really do. And I really want to go back to the homeless. I've spoke a lot about childcare. Kids are a part of my heart. Going back to the homeless, I remember there used to be a bus that used to go around to pick up the homeless kids after school. And they did homework with them, and they fed them. And now where they took them after that, I don't know. But I don't think that piece is in place. That is something that could really help our homeless population at the school, if we can get a piece like that back in place again.
Could we go ahead and give a round of applause to our absolutely delightful panel here? I hope that, like me, you have learned more, not just about the crisis, right, but about some of the challenges, some of the barriers, but also some of the opportunities, some of the potential ways that we, not just as a community, but individuals as well, can help address this issue in terms of homelessness and housing insecurity and its major relationship in terms of education. I have to say, I want to thank Castleton United Methodist because I've been a member of several churches. I grew up in 6 different states and probably over a dozen communities. But one of the things I'm most proud of being a member of this church community is they talk the talk and they walk the walk, and they recognize how important this conversation, all of you recognize how important this conversation is. All of our panel recognizes how important this conversation is. And you could have spent the last hour in a basement watching rain drip down, but instead, you spent it here with us, and you had the opportunity. We got to learn, we got to listen, and I hope now we also are empowered and emboldened with a call to action. The last thing I'd like to remind you is that we have our next event. This is a 4-part series, as I mentioned, so this is just the first. Our next one is coming up on Tuesday, June 4th, and that's also at 6:30. We'll be tackling the issue of homelessness, housing insecurity, and violence. Obviously, another substantial challenge within our community. And if you feel so inclined, in addition to contributing in the back to the Lawrence Schools Emergency Fund, I would welcome you to join us at Gleaners. We'll have a food drive starting Tuesday, June 4th. And you can learn more about that, and you can also sign up if you go to our website at castletonumc.org, and that's /Gleaners. Can we do one more round of applause? I think they earned it. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you next month for our next edition. Thank you.